So today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we drive change at scale within Atlassian. So I'm really going to focus in on this idea of change, because this is a big part of not just productivity, but everything we effectively do as an engineering organization. So part one, what the heck am I talking about? I'm going to throw a couple of numbers at you to start. As a company, we're over 10,000 employees. As an engineering organization, we have about 6,500 people in R&D. When you subtract out data science and all of those wonderful partnerships, you have about 5,500 engineers. We have a dozen products in cloud, we have a dozen products on-prem, we have something like 20 tech stacks in use, multiple monoliths, thousands of microservices. So my job, building developer tools and tech stacks, and about 18 months ago, I got tapped by our CTO to drive developer productivity improvements across all of Atlassian. And I went, shit. Very excited for the challenge, but if you've ever tried to drive large-scale change across an organization that large and diverse, you know it's quite an uphill battle. And frankly, I'd already tried and failed once before at Atlassian to do something like that, so I was a bit scarred, right? But I don't ever say no to a challenge, so I went, all right, let's do it. But developer productivity isn't the only massive change that we're driving across all of R&D. We're also constantly pursuing new compliance certifications. We're always having to up-level security. Reliability of our products is always a concern. We always want to raise the bar for our customers. Standardization, I just told you how many tech stacks and things like this. We need to standardize a lot more across the board. And again, that's huge change. We want to be able to make changes in our products faster. I see I'm on camera, so don't share this video after I say this, but for example, dark mode took us 2 years. That's embarrassing, right? So we've had to really look at the machine, if you will, the software factory, and go, okay, we need to be able to pursue FedRAMP faster. We need to be able to be more productive sooner, and so on. So how do we drive change systemically? And so effectively, if we ignore productivity, ignore compliance and security and all these things, what we're effectively trying to do is create a culture of continuous improvement. A culture that's always concerned about raising the bar on their engineering health. So, when we talk about change, there's really 2 types of change. And the business does not like what we call them without, but that's what we do. So we have the change within, and we have the change without. And what I mean by that is, we on a regular basis, so I run developer productivity for all of Atlassian. On a regular basis, I get reach outs from teams going, hey, this metric, how do I make it better? Hey, we're experiencing this friction and this bottleneck, how do we remove it, right? Teams are on this journey of self-improvement, even without us pushing them, but they need help. The business, like I said on the last slide, that we want to constantly drive change and constantly be more and more mature. So this is coming really from both sides, and we needed to be able to effectively intersect this desire into one thing or one system to drive the change. Now I said we've tried this and failed. Who else has tried this and failed? One person gravely raised their hand. Okay, a couple people are now being a little bit more honest, right? Like, it's hard and it sucks. Let's just admit this up front, right? And if you're anything like every company I've ever worked for in my career, every time there's a big change that's about to happen, here's what goes on. We're about to pursue HIPAA compliance. Get ready, it's gonna happen tomorrow, by the way. So screw your roadmaps. Do this thing. I don't really know what it means, but do it and do it fast. Thanks, right? That tends to be the thing, and then what happens, so effectively the business is going, and then the teams go, and then we're all just like, right? And then it takes 3 years. And then we finally do it. Yay, right? That's always been kind of the cycle that we've been on. And so when we really sat down and looked at kind of the last couple of failures that we had to drive change, we really boiled it down to a few things that we needed to be able to answer in gruesome detail up front. Putting myself in my shoes as the developer on the other end getting these, I need to know what exactly you're asking me to do, right? Like, for example, when I say, what are the FedRAMP requirements? Don't go, there's 325 controls, read them, right? What are the actual requirements? So make it very, very clear what it is that you're asking the teams to do. Explain the value behind it, because the first question is always, why, right? Explain what it's in for them as well, not just from the business perspective. How to do it, how to actually implement whatever that change is, or in the ideal world, which is what we always strive for, is it just happens. You just get it. It's free for you, right? We've done it for you, now you're compliant, or now you're meeting the law, whatever that is. And we need to provide some sort of validation to teams once they've implemented that change, that the change is indeed correct and it is indeed what we're looking for. And most importantly, we need a meter change. We can't go to a product like Jira and go, hey, by the way, do 500 things at once, and also deliver new features to our customers, right? We know that that's a trying battle, so we need to also effectively break limit change and be very conscious about who we're asking to change and what we're asking them to do. So the way that we effectively approach this now, after all of the lessons learned and after all of the scars, is we call this the virtuous loop. Okay? So this is something, to be totally transparent, we started within the developer productivity program. We said, okay, we need to drive a lot of, it started with PR hygiene, and then it went from there. Right? We need to improve PR hygiene. We need to improve CI/CD metrics. We need to improve reliability. We need to, right? And it just started spiraling. But it very much started with, I want to make teams more productive. How do we do it? So the way that we do this is we have some sort of measure. And when I say measure here, it can be arbitrary. It can also be a true-false thing. It doesn't always have to be some sort of a PR metric, right? Or a PR cycle time or something like this. This measure could be really anything. And we connect those measures to insights, and those insights always have some sort of an actionable practice or actionable recommendation on top of that, that tells people how to do it, or does it for them, right, effectively. And from there, that's what completes the loop. So those practices that we recommend, we spend a huge amount of time. I have data scientists that work with me, so they spend a huge amount of time, I should say, correlating and understanding the use of these practices to healthier teams. So we effectively prove that it will make that team healthier in that dimension before we roll it out to teams. The key thing here, and the hard thing, is contextualization. Because again, that diversity piece that I mentioned up front. So what we do is effectively, we present insights to our users. We give them data and information of how to improve. We give them a clear path to take action or do it for them. And then we make sure that they're able to track their progress and continue to see improvement over time. So let me get into details here on the user experience. That's me. We drew this morning. You can tell I'm not front end, right? Here are these slides. So at some point in the software development lifecycle, we raise an insight. And I say somewhere because we've instrumented the entire software development lifecycle at this point. That's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. And so we can raise, our vision here when we first started was raise the right insight at the right time, to the right person, in the right place, to do the right thing. Okay, that's a lot of rights, right? There's no one. So, in the right place, to the right person. So we need to meet them where they work. So for some standards and for some practices, we actually surface them directly in the IDE while you're in flow. We do that very, very rarely, and we only do that for things that we know are extremely costly to fix later. So we surface it right then. So we've instrumented your IDE. We also have instrumented your development environment, not just your IDE, your entire dev environment. and we can also surface insights and gather information right there. Obviously, we can raise insights within the PR, we can raise insights with the CI, we can gauge your deployment, right? And even beyond like those exact concrete pieces, we also have the developer portal. From the beginning of the journey, before you even start writing code, has a number of scorecards and metrics and data and recommended practices. And then at the very end of the software development lifecycle, we have a ritual called PECOPS, right? So again, we run this on a weekly basis to assess the health of your team, analyze what you need to do, and get healthier. And we also use that as well to very much surface these recommendations and insights. And actually, as funny as it sounds, because we actually don't really want people to just rely on PECOPS because it's retrospective and after the fact, people love it. 100% adoption across teams. It's really rare that I get to say 100% adoption across teams. So, right insight, right person, right place. Okay, the right person piece is quite difficult. So we have built something that we call our team segmentation model, which allows us to understand different attributes of teams. The team part is the important piece here. Obviously, we collect data and we surface data to individuals, but it's always very much looking at the construct of a team. So is your team front and back end? Are they full stack? Are you working on a monolith? Are you working on microservices? Are you working on multiple? What tech stacks are you working on? What repositories? We have all of that context and pulled into our engineering health systems to be able to then understand who you are and what practice, what insight we should be raising to you. Should have hit next. So that's the contextual data piece of this, right? And so attribution is very, very hard. Who else has reorgs every month? Okay. I can tell by the laughter that yes, we all experience that same thing, right? So team changes happen constantly. Services change ownerships constantly, and so on. So we're always having to refresh our attribution data. We are looking and constantly polling for these changes. The work model being out of date kills us every time, but that is a huge amount of effort on our part, right, to make sure it's not anymore. We've automated all of the data collection, but it was a huge effort on our part to get there. And I mentioned this idea that an insight must be actionable. That is probably the most important thing I can tell you today. Because when we first started this, we would just go, hey, your PR cycle time sucks. And teams would go, okay, how do I make it better? We go, make it better, right? That's quite literally like how change was happening, right? Make it better. So we spent, again, like we work up front to analyze and understand what are we call them interventions. What's the right intervention to raise at the right intervention point? And so we document our practices and then surface them. And in many cases, we just do it for you. And then, in addition to all of this instrumentation that I mentioned before, you can go and check the health of your team real time, anytime. So this is something that we've now, I shouldn't say this in camera, but we're in the process of productizing this and bringing this actually to our customers via one of our products. So a lot of what we learn and build within our own engineering organization ends up making it to products that you use as our customers. I assume you're all our customers, right, Kira? Okay. So we actually productize this, so we have a developer portal called Compass that we sell in the market. So we're quite literally bringing in like a developer experience dashboard that my organization sits all the way at the bottom of the engineering organization in terms of core infrastructure. Actually built for Atlassian and now it's being productized, but it's exactly that. I can now go in and say, show me how I am in terms of reliability. Show me how healthy I am in terms of security. Show me how healthy I am in terms of productivity. And it gives you your overall engineering health score. And we have a minimum bar for what we expect teams to be. And we, as the owners of that score, have to manipulate it on you. Right? So when the CTO tomorrow says, everyone needs to adopt safe release management practices, we say no problem, we inject that into our score, we weight that higher than everything else, all of a sudden your score went from 80 to 71, and now you need to go and adopt those practices, right? So again, creating that virtuous loop within our systems. So a bit on how we actually do this. So we call this program, ridiculously named as it is, the standard for standards. So like I mentioned before, we started really focused on productivity, but then we noticed that every other domain in our organization was having the exact same problem. And everyone else was reinventing the wheel, trying to figure out how to instrument systems and drive this change. So we effectively built a number of systems and then made them extensible and then brought in the rule sets from everyone else to drive this centrally. Again, removing some of those bespoke systems. And the important part of that was this, reducing thrashing, because that's what was happening, right? We were going and saying, productivity is the most important thing, fix it. And then this CISO was going, except you forgot about our trust commitments, right? And it was all coming at you in different ways. Some of the things were getting raised in tech ops. Some things were getting yelled at you somewhere else. And then you had a trust scorecard. And it was just noisy for our developers. And so by standardizing the way we drive standards, again, as much of that sounds like a circular logic, really helped reduce that thrashing, and it ensured that all of the change that we were trying to drive was of high quality, and we weren't just trying to half-ass something to get it over the finish line. And this allows us to, again, very systematically target improvement that we want to drive and target exactly what teams we want to improve and drive it that way. Because not all changes are all R&D, right? Some might just be for Java microservice developers when we need them to go and upgrade Spring Boot. How do we do that and make sure that we're not thrashing everybody else? So our framework for this kind of quick 5-part framework, first thing is find bar. What are we trying to do? How do we define that? What are the actual engineering requirements? Don't give me some hand-wavy crap. What are the actual engineering requirements for the teams and the systems? Set the bar. What do we expect? Right, we're going to roll this up to teams, we're going to roll this up to systems. What do we expect? Where's the bar? What does good look like? And again, make sure that's extremely well defined up front for teams. And tell them how we're going to measure the bar. Not so they game it, but so that we are transparent and we are clear and they know exactly what our systems are looking for them to be compliant or healthy, right? How to meet the bar. This is where we spend that time actually developing the practices and making sure that we provide that enablement to teams to educate them on those better practices, right? So this is what good looks like for PR hygiene. This is what good looks like for progressive rollouts and safe release management. And then the very, very important part, provide a way to meet the bar. Ideally, everything that I'm talking to you about, the engineering teams don't even know is happening. And that's happening actually most of the time. They don't even know. We just roll it out and it's done. We spent some effort over the last 18 months building something that we call our paved path tool, which quite literally understands the logic between all of our different platform components, and it manages the configuration for you. So you quite literally just declaratively say in something called component descriptor, here's all the things I need, and then the component descriptor is pulled in, like sucked up by this tool, parsed, and then it goes, oh, okay, you want to use Gradle, you want to use this, you want to do this, you want to do this, and it grabs all of what we call pavers, adds it to your code base. You give a simple bit of input as anything that's specific to you, and then from that point forward, all the configuration is managed for you. So the next time you want to, for example, roll out a Spring Boot update, all you have to do is update the paver, and then voila. And usually that updating of the paver is seamless. And then the last piece is measure bar. So historically, kind of up until about 2 years ago, when we started really trying to be good at driving change and kind of, if you will, grow up a little bit, all of our, again, like I was kind of saying before, we try the standard. It would just be like, hey, do this thing. And it would just be like, what is it? And it would just create this huge amount of thrashing. But the worst part of it was, we never knew if we were actually successful or not, because most of the time we actually didn't measure whether or not teams did it. That's pretty terrible, right? So we ask teams to go do a bunch of work and we don't even get the satisfaction on whether they do it. So this idea of measuring the bar is actually 2 parts. It's measuring whether or not teams met the bar, but that's actually not the important part. The important part of it is to measure whether or not it's giving the business the value back. That is quite difficult math problem, not being a smart aleck when I say that, because how do you turn the idea of a more reliable service into some sort of quantitative number that executives can understand, and so on. It's a big challenge for us, but it's important to actually be able to demonstrate the business value of that change, right? And articulate that up front, and then make sure that we are actually getting that benefit, because we want to fail fast. If we went through all of that and we still are rolling out a bad change, we want to know immediately to stop and come back to here. And so, again, yes, it's about measuring the bar, whether or not you meet the bar, but it's also measuring very much whether or not we're driving the right value. And then a little bit on the instrumentation piece. So what I just described to you is the pipeline. So we effectively do this in 3 phases, and we call this PI. First phase is publish, and publish is effectively declare intent. The I is implement, so do the instrumentation, get the implementation plan underway, roll this out to consumers, and E is evaluate. And for E, that begins as soon as we have a small enough sample size to begin evaluating to understand impact. And we stay and evaluate for the perpetuity of that particular engineering standard. So we're always measuring and implementing that value. So that piece of instrumentation and measurement is what we call our flywheel. And this is again like that instrumentation, those mechanisms that we actually use to raise the insights to teams and deliver those recommendations. Okay, you ready for a bunch of really poorly drawn circles? Okay. It all begins with data collection. This informs where we set the bar. If we collect a bunch of data and we understand that there's a huge amount of work needed, there's a huge amount of diversity that we're going to have to solve for, and we know that our baseline is very, very low, well, we can't set a target of 100% in 3 months. That's crazy, right? So we really need to understand. And so the second we even think we might do any kind of change in that area, we start measuring, if we haven't already begun measuring. For most of our SDLC today, we are measuring. We also need to understand all assets, all components of our software, right? So we effectively have ingested an entire software bill of materials for our entire set of tech stacks, for every resource running in every cloud, every Jira board, every repository, everything, right? Because we need to know how you're working and where you're working. Because right now I'm talking a lot about like mechanical engineering change, but we also want to change the behaviors of teams too. Right? We will see, for example, teams in their engineering processes are experiencing bottlenecks in how they prioritize work because we've instrumented Jira. And we'll quite literally go, you have too many things work in progress. You need to reduce that. Here's how. Or here's how to use cumulative flow to diagnose problems in your workflow. So it's not just engineering systems and writing code, it's also ways of working. So we collect all of those assets and we have to attribute them. Right? So we have as well the attribution metadata. So we need to understand what components and what libraries, what systems and services or repositories, who owns them, and where Jira board does that team work on. Because if we need to raise a violation against that team, we just want to pop a ticket right in their Jira board where they're already working and say, by the way, go do this. So attribution, very important, very difficult. And then evidence, right? Always collecting evidence of whether or not teams are, again, doing what we want them to do. And all of this culminates, right, that meeting the bar, defining the bar, culminates in a set of what we call readiness checks. Are you ready among these dimensions within this engineering domain? And that gets defined as a rule set and a system that we call asset readiness. We're very creative with our naming, as you can tell. And we, as we collect data and do that evidence collection, are always evaluating that rule set. So this was a challenge for us. Like when we first started this, a lot of our systems were very retroactive, or very latent, if you will. We were calculating, for example, what we call our global engineering metrics, usually on a weekly basis. At best, we were calculating them on a daily basis. So we need to go from like daily or weekly to as close to real time as possible. So this is quite a huge re-architecture for our data platform for engineering systems to become a lot more event-driven, a lot closer to real time in terms of data processing, data collection. And as you've already kind of knew was coming in our flywheel, once we have that evaluation against that rule set and looking at that evidence, that lets us know whether or not we need to raise an intervention. And one of our intervention points across the software development lifecycle, whereas where we raise that insight, which is connected to a recommendation, and we know that that's the right recommendation because of all of this data that we collect over here in terms of evidence and attribution. Okay, so let me tell you a very quick story, because I haven't already been telling you a very long story. A good example of us trying to solve many different business needs at once is the idea of something that everybody has the idea of golden images. We call ours a particular MGI because of our internal CAS is called Micros, which screws you up for life because you can never write microservice again. You write Micros service, and then everybody thinks you can't spell. So we use a CAS to deploy all of our software and all of our infrastructure as well. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone on the CAS was using images in a certain way. But unfortunately, this was not a change that we could make transparently. As much as we tried, this did actually require teams to go in and make some small configuration changes to then pull the right Docker image. This was very important to the business for a couple of reasons. First, this actually removed the burden of vulnerability management off the teams. Our teams no longer have to manage vulns. My organization does that for them within our tech stack group. Compliance. This also allows us to solve for things like FIPS inside our containers for you. And if you've ever dealt with FIPS, you know what I'm talking about. It is hellscape in terms of compliance. And then, of course, with this idea of us doing it for you, this is a huge productivity play. So we manage all roles, we manage all compliance for that image for you. And just vulnerabilities alone saved us 120 engineering years in the first 12 months. On bones. And that's not even factoring in FIPS, which in my opinion is worse. So this was a huge productivity play. So we were building this system that I just spent a few minutes describing, and I had to present our updates to our co-founder about the state of developer productivity, and he was like, great, what's the next thing we're going to drive? And I went, I guess Micros golden images. And he was like, great, what's the adoption today? And I was like, 30%? And he was like, great, 80% by the end of the quarter. And I was like, yeah. Because I had, this maybe sounds terrible, I had little confidence we were going to be successful. Yes, we had just done this huge amount of engineering work that was fun, and difficult, and challenging, and I felt very excited about it, but I didn't have that confidence because, again, my driving change had been so difficult for us in the past. So when we got that gauntlet thrown down by our co-founder, I went immediately to the teams and guys, and I went, no, it's going to be fine, right? So what we ended up doing for this one, immediately we had to begin data collection. We had already begun data collection, right? Like we knew where our baseline was, but when we began rolling this out, we noticed some problems. We were able to attribute services to teams, great. So we started raising insights to teams. And then we had teams go, that's not a service, idiot. What do you mean? So we were not able to differentiate between sidecars and services. So what do we have to do? We had to go back to our asset inventory system, do a bunch of work, do a bunch of data collection, go through that whole cycle again to make sure that we had onboarded sidecars as a separate asset class in the service, and then be able to, again, do all the attribution. So that was first panic, right? The second panic was, what's the right way to get this to teams? Right, so we have all of these different ways that we can do it, and we finally went, nothing scares them more than their trust score going down, right? Because trust is security and compliance. So we went, even though this is about productivity, So we actually ended up putting this in our trust scorecard as part of that system that I described to you before, rather than actually putting it under productivity. In fairness, it did align more there, and we had better direct correlation to a reduction in goals for the teams. Right? So it did make sense for us, and it scares everyone when something new goes in the trust scorecard, so that was also good. do like a little feeder to incentivize you. And then we spent some time investing on new papers. I mentioned that idea of a paved path tool. And so we made it so the second you create a new service, we say new project init in your paved path tool, you automatically already have all the new images. And then we also pushed pavers where possible to people and just said, add this and you get it, right? But they still had to accept the paver into their code base. So we did effectively preempt them. And of course, the thing I'm not covering is the communications aspect, which is very, very difficult. And if you use Slack like we use Slack, and I know no one uses Confluence like we use Confluence, you'll never find it. Right? There's so much information everywhere. So I'm going to kind of gloss over that, but I will say communication was a huge challenge for us, and making sure that we weren't just putting this in team scorecards, not letting them know up front. But ultimately, with all of this work and all this implementation, being able to provide the value up front to customers and show them, hey, if you quite literally add this behavior to your code base, it will take 5 minutes or less. And if you do this 5 minutes or less, this will save you this much effort of having to manage vaults. And by the way, here's all the productivity gains that go on top of that. We quite literally sold it like that to teams. And we raised this in their trust scorecard. We made it very easy. We provided a clear set of engineering practices. We did it. It actually, I'm not being smart, it surprised the absolute hell out of me. I don't want to sound condescending to my team, but we were just, oh. And then we went, oh my God, was this a fluke? Because you know what happened next, right? Part 2, next case study, right? Because then, since then, and that, by the way, of us hitting that 8% adoption was November of last year. Since then, so 6 months, we've driven 10 additional campaigns to successful fruition. 10. So it wasn't a fluke. It actually worked. Spending all this time and effort up front to make sure that teams were well informed, instrumented, and we made it very easy for them to accept change. Actually, it's paid off for us. And so we've now cut, like, I shouldn't say this again on camera, but front-end changes, for example, have been reduced from 120 days to less than 1 day. We've cut PR cycle time over half in the last 12 months. Reliability massively increased in terms of meeting our SLOs and time to detection and things like this, and it's all because of these systems that we put into place. And the instrumentation, except it's not. It's not about the instrumentation of machines, it's quite literally about communication and the enablement. And the understanding up front of actually what the hell we want teams to do. Because I think a lot of times that's what we're missing. We're just like, do change, yay! So there's a lot of effort, but we've been able to do it and made a lot of strides with engineering. And with that, I think I'm over time, so I'm just going to stop talking.